university faculty could do to help every student in their class and help most students at greatest risk. If I told you there's a way to get those kinds of results, lifting out all boats for all learners, and also closing persistent gaps in outcomes for students, surely every teacher would sign on for it. The insights you'll be hearing from our experts tonight point to the possibility of just such an intervention. This would be hopeful news in any time, but it is vital news in these times. Right now, many who teach are seeking new strategies to provide real, lasting engagement with learning in less than ideal circumstances. We know the importance of promoting a sense of belonging for our students. We know we want them to relate to the material we teach, not as stuff to cram in for a test, but as the stuff of life, the very problem-solving, perspective-taking, and skill-building that enables individuals to achieve expertise in so many areas, including a lifelong love of learning, the gift that keeps giving that so many of us cherish and wish for our students as well. Before I introduce our speakers tonight, I want to welcome not only our College of Natural Sciences community, but also friends from the College of Liberal Arts. Thank you, Dean Ann Stevens, for collaborating on new efforts that inspire new, more equitable approaches to teaching and learning, such as the very conversation taking place this evening. We also welcome colleagues and friends from the College of Education and a number of friends and leaders of the University of Texas at Austin, some of whom had initially planned to join us for this event when it was first scheduled for South by Southwest last March. And I'm especially pleased to welcome colleagues and friends from the University of Texas at San Antonio, as well as the University of Texas system. This year, the College of Natural Sciences has entered into a new, exciting collaboration with our colleagues in liberal arts, the Texas Mindset Initiative. This initiative, rooted in developmental psychology, innovative pedagogy, and a facilitated network of stakeholders, builds on creative work from people you'll hear from tonight. They are leaders in both the National Mindset Innovation Network and the National Study of Learning Mindsets. These celebrated efforts are centered on evidence-based ways to improve student outcomes, not just in one classroom, but across the nation. Well, it's now my pleasure to introduce tonight's conversation participants. David Yeager is Associate Professor of Developmental Psychology here at the University of Texas at Austin and Principal Investigator with National Study of Learning Mindsets. David's expertise lies in the science of adolescent behavior change and educational interventions. He is a William T. Grant Foundation Scholar with a focus on the intersection between psychological interventions and social contexts. Carol Dweck is the Lewis and Virginia Eaton Professor of Psychology at Stanford University and a pioneering researcher in the field of motivation and contributors to human success. She is one of the most influential social science scholars of the past 3 decades. Carol is the author of the best-selling book, Mindset, The New Psychology of Success, which explores how success in school, work, sports, the arts, and almost every area of human endeavor can be dramatically influenced by how we think about our talents and abilities. Mary Murphy is the Herman B. Wells Endowed Professor of Psychology and Brain Sciences at Indiana University, Bloomington. A UT Austin alumna, she directs IU's Mind and Identity in Context Lab, which focuses on developing and testing theories about how people's social identities and group memberships interact with the context they encounter to affect their thoughts, feelings, behaviors, physiology, and motivation. Mary's research illuminates the situational cues, such as faculty and institutional mindset, that influence student academic motivation and achievement, with an emphasis on understanding when those processes are similar and different for majority and minority students. David, Carol, Mary, welcome. And now I'll turn it over to David.
Fabulous. Great to see you all. I'm thrilled to have us here today. Let me tell you a little bit about how this is going to work. First, Carol is going to share some background on mindset research and kick us off. Then Mary is going to take us into the next generation of research, focus on instructors' practices. Then also talk briefly about what is going on here at UT and in our efforts to take this work and see how it can benefit our students and our system. And last, we'll have a Q&A. We really welcome everyone's questions. Please add them to the chat. We would be thrilled to engage with you during our session today, but also it gives us a record of what you've asked, so that way we can follow up with you afterwards. With that, I'm going to hand the Zoom over to Carol, and she will take us away.
Okay. Many years ago, we asked a question, and that question has only become more and more urgent. We're here today to confront that question anew, so that we can deliver inclusive and effective education, education that will prepare our students to contribute to society in ways that are so urgently needed. Look, this is the generation that will rebuild the world, and we need them, all of them, to be ready. The question we asked was this: why do some students love challenges and cope well with difficulty, even showing increased enjoyment and performance in the face of setbacks, while others, no less skilled, shy away from challenges and are derailed by setbacks? What do these challenge-seeking students know? We made a vow to learn their secret, bottle it, and distribute it widely. And more recently, we made a further vow, probably a more important vow, to learn how to create contexts, classrooms, in which this zest for challenge and mastery could live and thrive. Why is this important? Well, first, a dramatic change comes over many children. Here's an infant, the nephew of a colleague, who just turned on a computer for the first time. Look at that joy in challenge and learning. But just a few years later, we see this and this. And if we check in a few years after that, when students are in secondary school and college and are starting to make life-changing academic decisions, do our students want challenges? The data say no. But today, we'll hear about, wait, not really. So today we'll hear about research showing that students' mindsets can foster a desire for challenge. Are our students prepared for the future? Not really. There are many countries, including our own, where so many students hope to enter highly skilled professions, but they're not on track for them. Today, we'll hear research showing that students' mindsets can help bring their achievement more in line with their aspirations. What about the high achieving students? Are they all set? Are they okay? Well, not really. When we look beneath the surface, many of them with high scores and high grades show disturbingly high levels of anxiety or depression. How are they going to confront and improve our world from a place of chronic fear and despondency? As you will probably not hear today unless you ask the question, students' mindsets can play a role in their mental health, their stress, their depression, and their overall well-being. What about the disparities in inclusion and opportunities that were always there, but they're now even more visible and growing in many places? We'll hear from our speakers how mindsets and growth mindset practices in classrooms can help foster inclusion and create more equitable learning environments and more engaging environments for all students, which is especially important during COVID. So should we be worried that things are far from ideal right now? Maybe, but more than that, we should be determined Okay, so where are we now? What do we know? Where are we going? Let's start with what we know. As I've been suggesting, we know that students' mindsets about their talents and abilities can play a role in achievement and well-being. What are these mindsets and how do they work? Well, when students are in more of a fixed mindset, that means they believe their talents and abilities are just fixed. They have a certain amount, and that's that. This mindset sets up a world in which challenges are risky. They can reveal deficiencies in your fixed ability. And mistakes and setbacks are worst fears confirmed. They actually show your fixed ability to be inadequate. But when students are in more of a growth mindset, that's when they believe their talents and abilities can be developed through hard work, but not just that, through good learning strategies and lots of help, mentoring, support from others. In this mindset, taking on challenges becomes the way to develop abilities, not a risk. And setbacks become a natural part of learning. You can capitalize on them to advance your knowledge and understanding. Let's take a moment to look at this in the brain. The brain on the right represents students in a growth mindset who just made a mistake. This red brain is in the learn from mistakes mode. It's all lit up. They process the error deeply, and by the way, we're more likely to correct it at the next opportunity. The brain on the left, the fixed mindset students, detected the error, but quickly fled from it and were, no surprise, less likely to learn. What else tells us mindsets have a role to play? In these substantial studies around the world, students' mindsets were measured and they were predictive of academic outcomes such as grades and achievement test scores. In 70 plus of the, in all but a few rather, of the 70 plus countries where the PISA achievement test is administered, in all but a few of the 70 plus, growth mindset significantly predicted higher reading scores. In our national study, which I'll tell you about in a moment, mindsets that were measured at the beginning of high school predicted subsequent grades in high school, completion of advanced courses, on-time high school graduation, and college enrollment. Now, these are exciting correlations, but they're just correlations. Can we actually influence students' mindsets to increase their desire for challenge and increase their future achievement? Early, smaller scale experiments said yes, but they were in person, too labor intensive, too costly, could never be scaled up. So in 2015, your own David Yeager had a bold, visionary idea, maybe even a foolhardy idea. Could we distill the message down to under an hour? Could we deliver it to a nationally representative sample of over 12,000 high school freshmen, making that very difficult transition? And was there even a remote chance we could have a meaningful impact on students' grades and advanced course taking? Before I tell you the answer, let me tell you a little bit about the program, because I want you to understand we didn't just define a growth mindset or teach them a growth mindset and turn them loose. We motivated the students to understand and use and internalize and use the message. First, we made them our collaborators on the program, not people who needed our help. We further respected them by teaching them the neuroscience behind a growth mindset. We made them benefactors towards others. For example, we asked them to use their growth mindset to write a mentoring letter to a struggling student. We asked them to write about how they could use their new growth mindset to make their own contribution to society later. What happened? Well, there were noteworthy, especially in the realm of educational programs, noteworthy effects on students' subsequent grades that year and on their advanced course taking in math the next year. But we also asked, where didn't the program work? As you probably know, researchers don't usually seek out places where their study won't work, but you can learn a lot from that, and we did learn a lot. Here's the most important and for today relevant thing we learned. Teachers' mindsets mattered tremendously. Only when teachers held more of a growth mindset, believing that intelligence, intellectual abilities could be developed, only then did their students' new and improved growth mindset take root and turn into higher grades. When the teacher held more of a fixed mindset, students' new growth mindsets, even though we saw it there at the end of the program in their endorsement and their challenge seeking, their new mindsets did not take root and did not turn into higher grades, as you can see with in the bar on the left. Why? After our program, when students go back into their classrooms with their new or fortified growth mindset, they may ask, is this a place I can put it into practice? In a growth mindset classroom, the answer is yeah. They see practices that are aligned with, consistent with what they just learned, practices that focus on learning and development. For example, the teacher fostering an excitement about mistakes, valuing struggle, soliciting questions even from students who are not the fast learners, rewarding improvement. But in more of a fixed mindset classroom, they may see practices that really contradict a growth mindset, ones that focus on judgments and measures of relative ability, ones that separate the smart students from the less competent students, ones that reward fast learning and immediate high performance. In a college classroom, professors coming from more of a fixed mindset have been heard to say things like, if it's hard for you, you don't belong here, or I don't want any stupid questions. This means that students who are experiencing any difficulty, any confusion, are going to wonder, do I belong here? If they're wanting to ask a question, they have to stop and think, is it worth it? Is it a stupid question? Am I impugning my ability if I even speak here? Contrast this with things that more of the growth mindset professors said. Things like, everyone here is capable of learning the material and doing well in the course, and we'll work with you until that happens. So, to recap, we know how to teach a growth mindset to students. We know some of the practices. We have ideas about some of the practices that sustain a growth mindset versus don't. But we urgently need to know more about, first, what are the instructors coming from more of a fixed mindset doing? What should they stop doing? And this includes things like false growth mindset, like exhorting students to try harder when they may or may not have the strategies that they need to be taught, or equating it with just thinking positively or just telling students you can do anything. Trying to instill confidence, but without the support for learning. Or many teachers just put a chart in front of the room or give a lecture at the beginning, but then don't alter their everyday practices in ways that would support a growth mindset and may even contradict it. We need to know more about what the growth mindset teachers are actually doing to support and sustain growth mindset effects in students. More than that, aside from promoting a group of beneficial practices, what would it take to create full growth mindset classroom cultures? Ones that are culturally sensitive and inclusive, that value and support everyone's growth, and that ask, what can we learn from students of diverse backgrounds that can help the entire class become a more dynamic community of learners? And how can we develop and then distribute the resulting teacher training programs? Now, you may not realize this, you probably didn't realize this when you came today, but we are all here to begin a collective climb up Mount Everest. We call our project to develop a teacher training program the next Mount Everest, because it's a challenging one, and because we believe students' full potential cannot be achieved and educational equity cannot be achieved until we know how to create school cultures that embody and sustain teachers' growth mindsets and students' growth mindsets. In this session, my colleagues will present what is known about the effects of teacher mindsets and mindset-related practices on students. We'll discuss what teachers are doing during COVID to foster students' motivation and engagement. My colleagues will discuss a research plan aimed at answering the Mount Everest questions over the next few years by continually testing and revising teacher materials. I might add, with an incredible team of researchers and practitioners. There's never been a more important time to figure this out, with so many students having to learn more independently, with so many of them falling behind, and with so many modern jobs requiring advanced skills. We believe that every student deserves to dream about those high-level jobs, deserves to be ready to make their unique contributions to society, and deserves to be guided by us on a daily basis along a path that will get them there. This is our vision. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carol. While Mary's getting her slides ready, we have I'll take a question from the audience. A question is, how do you think about grades and the fears students have about their grades and you know, students wanting to be pre-med and so on? How do mindsets relate to students' feelings about grades and also professors and how they think about them?
I'll say something. We did a study of pre-med students because they all care about grades. Every one of them cares about grades. But those in more of a growth mindset kept the focus on learning, on curiosity, and they saw their grades as an index of learning and mastery. Whereas those in more of a fixed mindset saw their grades as a measure of their intelligence and their worth even. And so they were anxious, they lost curiosity and intrinsic interest as time went on. And in the end, they didn't do quite as well in the course, especially if they had stumbled initially. Those with more of a growth mindset, even when they stumbled initially, plunged in with vigor and recovered by the end. So it's not the grades, it's kind of what you make of them.
Right. Well, next up, we have Mary Murphy, legendary scientist and UT alum, to share about mindset cultures.
Yes, big shout out to my former mentors, Jamie Pennebaker and Bob Josephs in psychology, and all of my fabulous faculty back at UT Austin. It's great to be with you all. I'm going to talk a little bit about, first, what do we mean when we talk about mindset culture? Just put forward a definition so we're all on the same page when we're thinking about mindset culture and sort of thinking about how it relates to individual students' mindsets or our mindsets as faculty. So when I'm talking about mindset culture, I'm really talking about the beliefs of powerful people in a setting. That would be like us, teachers and faculty members. In a workplace, it would be people like supervisors or bosses. It's what are our beliefs about talent and ability? Do we think that students' talents and abilities are things that are fixed, relatively stable, can't change very much, or are they more of a potential that can be developed by pursuing the right strategy, seeking help when they're stuck, working with others? And this mindset culture, these beliefs of the powerful people in a setting, are expressed by what we as faculty say and do in our classroom. What are our interaction norms with students? What are our policies? Do we offer opportunities for practice and feedback? What are our practices in terms of our teaching? How do we introduce difficult topics that we know almost all students are going to struggle with when they first learn about them? How do we interact when students raise a hand and get the question wrong versus right? So all of these things communicate the mindset culture. That's how it is experienced and communicated to students. So how might faculty mindsets actually influence students' experiences and performance? We had at least a couple of hypotheses when we first went into this work. One is that it might affect all students' engagement and performance. Why is that? Well, if you look at the 25 years of research on students' personal mindset beliefs, you saw that most times when students adopted more of a growth mindset in a learning context, they showed greater engagement and motivation and better performance in those classes. So maybe when the faculty member holds a growth mindset belief, it might positively influence all students' engagement and performance in that environment. However, we also had a second hypothesis that's complementary to the first, which is that we hypothesized that perhaps faculty mindset beliefs might be even more important, have even stronger effects for students who belong to groups that are negatively stereotyped regarding intelligence and ability. Because these beliefs are really about what faculty think, who can be smart in the moment, we thought that they might have particular impacts on the students who our culture says has less innate ability or negatively stereotyped in these domains. That might be Black, Latinx, and Native students, as well as first-generation students, low-income students, and women in STEM classrooms. Why might this be? Because we know that we have this enduring impact of stereotypes in our society. These stereotypes about racial and ethnic minority students and women, particularly in STEM contexts and in these evaluative settings, persist to today. Most people can tell you what the cultural stereotypes are about who is good and who should be good in these different environments. And these stereotypes importantly impugn the very abilities that these beliefs are about competence and intellectual ability, about ability in STEM, for example. So what we did in this work is we really want to challenge people to take students' perspective, and that's how we came to these hypotheses. From the perspective of students, putting ourselves in their shoes, when my professor seems to have a fixed mindset, I think that the professor believes that the abilities that it takes to do well here, mental rotation, right, spatial calculations, these things are fixed. They can't be changed. You either have them or you don't, right? Much of this work has been done in STEM because this has been funded mostly by the National Science Foundation. And so, you know, we really started to examine this in STEM, though we've now replicated it outside to the social sciences and humanities as well. So if you take students' perspective, you believe your professor thinks some people have it, some people don't. These abilities are fixed. You can't do much to change them. What's the inference students make then about who has these abilities? Well, our cultural stereotypes do a lot of work in filling that in. Our professor might expect that maybe it's the white students, or perhaps the model minority students, the Asian students, and in particular the men in the context who have more of this innate natural STEM ability than, say, Black, Latinx, Native, or women students in STEM. However, if I have a professor who seems to have a growth mindset about students' abilities, they think that these abilities are things that are malleable. Students can improve as long as they're engaging in the right strategies, persisting through challenges and actually learning over the course of the term. Well, if my professor seems to believe that, then the inference students make, we thought, would be that all students, regardless of their background, whether they come from the majority or minority backgrounds, as long as they're pursuing those growth mindset strategies, putting in the effort, adopting the right strategies that lead to success, anyone should be able to be successful in these learning environments with that particular faculty. There was some initial evidence when we were doing this research, some pioneering work by Sarah Jane Leslie and Andre Simpian, published in Science, that showed what they did here was they surveyed faculty and graduate students across all of these various disciplines, and they asked them a particular question, which was, to what extent is brilliance and genius, natural ability, required for success in this field? And then what they did was they mapped those beliefs by these powerful people in these contexts against the NSF numbers about the percentage of US PhDs who actually were women pursuing their PhDs in these fields. There's a similar graph too for racial and ethnic minorities. And what they saw was that there was a relationship both in the STEM fields and in the non-STEM fields, that the more faculty believed that brilliance was required, the less likely women were to be pursuing their PhD in those particular fields. So we offered a theory here. We thought that perceiving a STEM professor to endorse these fixed mindset beliefs might create a context of stereotype threat, particularly for those groups that are negatively stereotyped in these domains. It puts students at risk of confirming these negative ability stereotypes about their group when they think their professor endorses these beliefs. Now, how would we know that we are seeing an effect of stereotype threat based on these faculty mindset beliefs? Well, we should see the same kind of performance effects that we see in stereotype threat studies. So underrepresented racial and ethnic minority students, for example, underperforming in these contexts relative to white and Asian students, much more in the classrooms where faculty have more of these fixed mindsets, and much less so in the classrooms where faculty have more of a growth mindset. That was our hypothesis. So we conducted an institution-wide study. This is an entire university's STEM faculty who participated in this study, 150 STEM faculty here. And we did a longitudinal study where we gathered 7 semesters, 602 courses. You and I both know faculty have a big reach, right? They reached over 15,000 students over the course of those 7 semesters. And we actually measured faculty's self-reported mindset beliefs. And in support of hypothesis 1, we found that students perform worse in the classrooms which were taught by faculty who self-reported more fixed mindset beliefs relative to growth mindset beliefs. We also found, in support of hypothesis 2 here, that the racialized achievement gap was twice as large in courses that were taught by faculty who self-reported these fixed mindset beliefs than in the classes taught by faculty who endorsed growth mindset beliefs. Another way to talk about these data is that the racialized achievement gap was halved in courses taught by faculty who self-reported more of these growth mindset beliefs. So then, of course, the question becomes, what are those faculty members doing, and how can we, as Carol says, bottle that up? So we wanted to explore in the data, what's it like to be a student in these fixed and growth mindset classes? Well, we gathered those course evaluations from those 602 courses that I mentioned before. And here's what we learned from those data. These are the standard course evaluation questions that are asked across the university. What we found was that growth mindseted professors were much more motivating to their students. Students said, the instructor motivated me to do my best work. They also emphasized in their everyday teaching students' own learning and development, really showing students how far they've come across the course of their learning and development during the term. Students, of course, were also more likely to recommend the instructor to their peers. But interestingly, we did not see effects on, for example, questions related to rigor, so a perceived rigor from the students. Compared to other courses, how much time did the course requirements take? How much extra time outside of class did you have to put in? How difficult was the level of work? We did not find statistically significant effects there. So this starts to answer this question: what's it like to be a student in these classes? Growth mindset instructors emphasize learning and development explicitly to their students. They motivate students to do their best work, and yet their classes from the student's perspective seem to be equally time intensive and rigorous. So we wanted to understand more about the student experience and how this actually influenced the downstream outcomes of, say, something like performance in class. So in this study, led by Katie Minks, who's now a professor at UT, I send my good students back to UT Austin in education and psychology. She conducted this study with our team, looking at how the perceptions of STEM professors' mindsets influence students' experiences in their actual college classrooms. In this study, we engaged in an experience sampling methodology where we had over 1,000 first and second year students enrolled in more than 50 STEM courses across 4 different universities. And what we did here was we asked students, tell us a little bit about what you think your faculty members' mindset beliefs are. So the professor seems to believe some students have a certain amount of intelligence and they can't do much to change it. Then they engaged in some experience sampling surveys. This is back when iPod Touches were cool. They got an iPod Touch. And we basically asked them after every single class, pinged to their schedule, the extent to which they felt a sense of psychological safety in that class, a sense of belonging, lower evaluative concerns, less of feeling an imposter in the classroom. So we had many surveys, and we're doing some multi-level modeling here. Ultimately, our process model revealed that perceiving one's STEM professor to endorse more fixed mindset beliefs led to greater psychological vulnerability in the moment. In that particular professor's class, students were feeling less of a sense of belonging, more evaluative concerns, greater imposter feelings, and overall more negative affect. And that had implications for their downstream engagement and performance. It lowered their course engagement, how much they put forward effort, the extent to which they attended class, whether they had greater or lower dropout intentions. It also shaped their interest, and this is really important for us faculty, right? It lowered interest not only in the particular STEM professor's course, but also in his or her profession more broadly. When students perceive their professor to endorse more fixed mindset beliefs, students overall were less interested in that particular field or discipline. It also, of course, lowered their course performance in that particular faculty member's class. So what are teachers actually saying and doing that communicate their mindset beliefs to students? My students and I recently conducted what we call this mouse tracking study that takes the computer mouse and really understands how students, from the student's perspective, how are they understanding the different kinds of practices and policies and messages that we are sending as faculty as relatively fixed-minded or relatively growth-minded. So in this study, students first learn about what mindset is, and then they're offered this task where they have the mouse here at the center, and an item will appear like the professor's offering additional practice problems. And students simply categorize whether this seems more growth-minded to them or more fixed-minded. And that included 119 professor behaviors and statements, those poor students having to categorize all of those things, but we learned a lot from their data. So this is an example of what this looks like. The professor offers additional practice problems. If I have little uncertainty, it's easy for me to categorize it as growth-minded. My trajectory of my mouse looks like this. If there's some uncertainty, it might look like this. If there's a lot of uncertainty and I'm really not sure whether this particular message is fixed or growth-minded, instead it looks like this. So what are the results? We pre-registered our predictions for all 119 of those practices that faculty engage in. And what we found was that we know some stuff, right? We could actually predict with some agreement, some strong likelihood about how students would categorize these various messages and practices in our classrooms as fixed or growth. So let's look at what some of these are. In terms of the practices and behaviors categorized as growth-minded from students, you know, when the professor tries different ways of explaining course material to ensure all students understand, when they encourage students to email questions so they can improve their understanding of the material, or when faculty say to struggling students, listen, it's okay, mistakes are opportunities to learn when they're making mistakes. How about some of the cues that are signaling fixed mindset to students? Here we see that when the professor encourages struggling students to drop the class, this is clearly categorized as fixed-minded from students' perspective. When the faculty at the start of the semester says something like, listen, not all students are capable of doing well in this class, categorized as fixed-minded. When they don't hold regular office hours because they don't think the extra time is going to actually do anything to help students, again, fixed-minded. And to struggling students, when the professor says, listen, it's okay, you're just not a math person, that kind of backhanded compliment in some ways, you know, really is signaling the fixed mindset from students, you know, on the part of the faculty member. So the study takeaways here are that messages that prioritize grades and suggest intellectual ability as natural and static were more often categorized as fixed. Messages that faculty sent that prioritize student learning and suggested that ability can improve are more categorized as growth. And what we saw, interestingly, is that when faculty provided their reasons for why they're saying and doing the things they do, why they hold office hours, why they want students to come to answer and ask questions in class, it was much easier for students to categorize those behaviors from the student perspective. So of course, we are engaging in this next Mount Everest, right? We want to learn, along with college faculty, how we can create these psychologically safe growth mindset cultures in our class. And we have some pioneering organizations that are UT is partnering with in order to do this. So an organization David and I co-founded called the College Transition Collaborative has been engaged with many other learning organizations funded by the Rakes Foundation to really look across this year, 6 different universities looking at the student experience and how faculty can create institutional change by changing their messages within their syllabus in their first day of class, changing their evaluation and feedback practices, as well as some of their early alert practices to create these more cultures of growth mindset in their classes, and then engaging in continuous improvement methods by looking at how students are experiencing their classes in the moment, again in those quick surveys, as well as looking at its effects on grades and downstream course taking. The College Transition Collaborative is going to be working with UT and other schools to create these scalable tools for helping college faculty create more psychologically safe growth mindset cultures in their classroom. So to wrap up here, what do we mean when we're talking about the impact of growth mindset cultures? What we've learned so far is that these growth mindset cultures communicate to students that intelligence and ability is something that can be developed and expanded with good strategies, persistence, asking questions, and seeking help. And that instructors who do this, who communicate a growth mindset of ability, really increase students' motivation and engagement, reduce their psychological vulnerability in the moment in class, increase students' sense of belonging and performance, and create more equitable learning environments. Mindset culture is going to be part of our journey on this next Mount Everest of the mindset journey. What are instructors saying and doing that communicate beliefs to students? We need to learn much more about this. Can instructors create these cultures sustainably over time, given everything else we have to do, as well as with fidelity? Do our beliefs need to change in addition to our behaviors, or is our behavior change enough? And how does instructors and student mindsets actually interact in the classroom? These are all questions we're going to be exploring as we move forward in the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mary. While I get settled, we have a beautiful question from Vernita, who's coming from the physics department and who has actually taught me a lot about mindset practices in CNS courses in the last few weeks. Her question is, how do you talk about the fact that students come in with different levels of experience and often along group lines, in part because of the ways that schools are segregated and opportunities are inequitably distributed in our public school? So does growth mindset mean ignoring differences in prior preparation? And then how do you acknowledge differences in prior preparation without implying that some students have what it takes and others don't?
This is something that we've been contending with as we have engaged with faculty. And one of the things we've learned is that being colorblind or being group blind to some of these inequities actually signals more of a fixed mindset to students than actually recognizing some of the inequalities that have actually existed for students. And that by talking about these inequalities that's existing as a function of the structure and the inequalities built into our educational system actually takes the pressure off of students to feel like there's something about me. Maybe I don't have what it takes to do well here, right? So when we talk about different students at different levels, that's true. It's due to structural inequalities. We could talk about it that way. And it still means that we all have a lot of learning and growth and development to do. And that in fact, if we wanted to create a mindset culture in our class, it would behoove us to create a community of learners where those students who maybe had more advantages because of their social situation in the past actually take on some responsibility to help the entire community move forward and grow and develop, right? And that we can do this together. And that's actually helping to create a sense of a growth mindset culture where it's everybody's responsibility. We're not going to leave any students behind, no matter where they started in terms of their learning and development. And so I've seen faculty, for example, put this into practice with the way that they structure group work or study groups and things like that, where they really sort of set the tone about the goal of this is not to compete within the group, but actually to help each other utilize whatever talents and skills and experiences they've had, which are likely to be very varied, to help the entire group come along and understand the material over time. So I hope that gives us a little bit of an example of what could be done. Carol, anything to add?
No, that was great. In fact, growth mindset is sometimes interpreted as meaning everyone's the same. Everyone has the same talents. Everyone has the same knowledge. No, people differ at any given point. That's not incompatible with the view that everyone can develop their abilities.
Yeah. I sometimes say growth mindset is a theory about slopes, not about intercepts. Or at least not intercepts where you are right now. What I want to do is build on this research and say, okay, sounds great. What is anyone going to do about it besides try hard in our own classes? Like, what does it look like to take growth mindset ideas and the powerful research that you all have led and begin imagining systemic change? And I think a reason to do that is because, like, why not? I mean, really, we're facing really serious crises in education right now. So as we all know, with COVID, students will be coming to us 12 months from now with basically 18 months of having been out of school, right? And they'll be expected to learn calculus and organic chemistry and so on, but they'll be really far behind. And furthermore, the level at which students will be behind will be unequal. We know that more advantaged students are able to, join pods and hire private tutors and so on, but students with fewer economic means are not going to be able to do that. And so we have always had highly unequal outcomes in education in the US and in Texas, but that's going to be magnified in the next year. But also our students will be coming to us with greater stress, anxiety, and depression than ever before. I think there was a 300% increase in national levels of clinically significant levels of anxiety over the last few months, according to the Pew. And a year of isolation from friends and extracurriculars will only magnify that, I think. But if the problem wasn't bad enough, we're going to have to address underperformance and inequality and mental health with fewer public resources than ever before. So there's really no reason to believe that we won't be facing pinches in the public purse coming from economic disaster that we're all currently experiencing. So what that means is we're going to need to achieve greater gains and do so more equitably than ever before without pressing students so quickly and so far ahead in a way that magnifies existing problems with stress, anxiety, and depression. And unfortunately, we need to do these two things that have never been done before in our nation's history more efficiently than ever before. So Tony Bright calls these the triple aims of educational improvement, and they're huge. And so really, this should be a time not of relaxing and looking back on successes and laurels in higher education, but really finding ways to think differently and all really be on the same team and trying out new ideas. So how do we get started? Well, one thing we can do is try to embed growth mindset in our students and in our instructors in the psychological predicament of students coming to college and making that transition. This is a graph from a published psychology paper that looks at self-esteem. If you would have graphed feelings of belonging or competence, you would have seen the same thing. And I love this graph because it shows what happens to so many students every single year when they come into our classes. They start at the beginning of freshman year thinking, wow, this is great. I'm at UT. I'm at my dream college for many students. I'm pretty proud of myself. But then what do you see over the first semester, right? You see the freshman seminar happens. Their first chemistry test or physics test happens, right? Their writing is criticized and so on. And students start to doubt themselves. Now, by the end of college, almost all students recover a feeling of belonging and competence. But in that early part, that trough, it's normal for students to question their potential and their belonging and to question whether people will be there for them. And that's where mindsets can kick in, because this question of, is it normal for me to be struggling? Will it ever get better? People answer those questions based on their beliefs about the world and their beliefs about settings. And so when students think, hey, this struggle I'm feeling now is a sign that I'm not a math person or I can't succeed in this course, then students mentally imagine a downward slope. They imagine it continuing to get worse and worse. When students, though, think of their potential or their relationships with teachers as improvable or changeable, then they start imagining an upward slope. And so what we want to try to do is to find ways to be intentional about mindset messages for students, especially those facing stress and anxiety and worry, and those facing inequality in this sensitive period of the transition to college. And this is a reason why we're having this cross-cutting conversation right now in this part of the semester, because there's actually a lot that those of you joining us on this call can be doing. Unfortunately, we don't actually know all the tips and tricks that should be implemented by faculty in moments like the first semester of college. And that's why we're trying to launch a new initiative that we call the Texas Mindset Initiative. It could also be called TMI because there's a lot of moving parts. We'll call it TextMI. And the idea is to learn from and with faculty here at UT and across the state, and then spread effective mindset practices after they're rigorously evaluated. So rather than researchers deciding in advance what all of the ideal mindset practices are, what we want to do is to partner with people that are innovating in their classes every day, trying to support students, and be able to articulate what it is about their mindset practices that could be promising and could be working. And then after articulating it, learn how to spread it to other faculty across the state. What are our goals? The goal is to develop instructor supports for people like you that reliably improve achievement, reliably reduce inequalities, and reliably improve well-being and stress resilience in where we're at, for a start, math and science courses in two different transitions, transition to high school and the transition to college. Again, this is harder than anything we've done before. And so what I'm going to talk about now is how we want to learn and really want to put the emphasis on the learning community that we're hoping to start here at University of Texas. Well, how do you get started on something like this? One of the first things you can do is try to look to bright spots. So who are the instructors that don't know everything, but have learned a lot in their years of expert practice? And one of the people I look to again and again is Uri Treisman, who's, as many of you know, a faculty member here at UT. And for 2 different semesters, I sat in on his freshman calculus class. Just wanted to know, what does one of the world's greatest growth mindset teachers say and do maybe even without thinking about it. And I learned so much, and Paul Tuff wrote about Uri's practices in his book, The Years That Matter Most, which highlights several faculty here at UT, including David Laudy. And what we see is not just in Uri's classes, but in some other classes like his, that there are tiers of supports for mindsets that are unfold over the course of the term and are timed to moments at which students are bound to be questioning their ability and their potential and looking for information about whether success is possible. So this is a start of what we think a mindset supportive classroom might look like. So we think it's important for students to learn the basic ideas of growth mindset through the kinds of interventions that Carol described and that we've tested in randomized trials, but that's not the end of it. And once students are armed, in a sense, with the growth mindset, they should also encounter practices in our classes, like the language we use, like what Mary suggested, right? So this struggle is a sign you're learning. It's not a sign that you're ill-equipped to succeed. What are our policies about, for example, whether students can recover points that they missed early in the term if they gain the knowledge and learn about it later in the term, right? So do we have policies that value the upward slope? And I'm not talking about policies that are just rewarding students for trying hard, but rather rewarding students for continuing to learn and master material on a pace that might be different from the planned pace in our syllabi. And what are the routines that we add to our class, right? The check-ins, the ways that we describe office hours, the ways that we ask students to work with one another in small groups. Not just practices, but the habits that are built into the rhythm of our courses that imply to students that all people can learn and grow. And last, there are moments when, even in a mindset supportive class, students have a crisis of confidence. Maybe it's a failed exam or a major assignment, or maybe it's just that time in November when it feels like everything is piling up and they don't know what to do about it, right? Those are times where messages from students from previous cohorts who have been through our classes could be really useful. They could boost mindset messages. So we don't know all of the list of things that could fit into these buckets, but what we are doing is trying to get started by asking 8 different fellows in natural sciences to learn basically the content you learned today, and then try to innovate in their courses this fall, and then describe what they did in a way that could potentially be tested by other either faculty or potentially in other experiments down the road. So we've, in a partnership with CNS, TIDES, Office of Strategy and Policy, our group at the Population Research Center, and then, as Mary mentioned, the College Transition Collaborative, along with College of Education. We have 8 mindset teaching fellows who are thanked at the bottom of this slide. It's kind of a Noah's Ark situation. We have 2 each from chemistry, biology, physics, and math, collectively reaching over 2,000 students who are the first time in college. And they're developing practices that make sense to them, that feel authentic. And they'll be presenting their progress at a campus-wide teaching event in November. And then we're gonna start thinking, how do we spread these to other people and test them? So to conclude, right now, everyone on this call, we hope you just stay curious about these ideas. Maybe think of a few things to change or improve about your practices so that you hopefully will have things to share with your colleagues. If you'd like to read more, we've just posted a few of the background readings. There's no obligation, of course, but you're welcome to check it out. And then some of these organizations that Mary mentioned are listed down at the end. So with that, I think we're going to transition to Q&A. And I think we have about 5 or 10 minutes of that before we hand it back to Paul. So thank you all for your attention, and we look forward to a vibrant discussion for the rest. Mary, do you want to see if what's popping up for questions?
Sure. There was a question here. A lot of people are sort of wondering how different kinds of theories are interacting with mindset. So how does emotional intelligence, for example, play into mindset theories, particularly when it comes to highly sensitive individuals that have been essentially trained, the question says, to have a fixed mindset due to teacher influences? maybe there's a question about socialization, where maybe like, students come in with that. There's another question around another theory around, David, your work in purpose, and how does the idea of purpose actually interact with this idea of mindset? So I don't know if we want to take these ideas of these different, emotional intelligence or socialization and purpose, and their relationships to mindset.
Let's talk about purpose, because it comes into culture. So I'm going to say something, then I'm going to hand it to you, Mary, to talk about Steph's work. But I think that, in America, we have an idea that effort matters, right? You should try hard, you should persist. But for lots of students, it's not obvious to them what the payoff is of this race to nowhere that they sometimes feel like they're on. Like they feel like, I'm going to toil and toil and toil and wait for the second marshmallow, but why? And so in the run up to the National Mindset Study, we realized we shouldn't take for granted that everyone has the same internalized reason to grow a stronger brain. And we should also find ways to match other values that might be motivationally salient to young people. And so the desire and ability to contribute, to make the world better, to feel like you have a voice in the future is a way to, I think, motivate the mindset beliefs and get people to implement them. And so that's what I see in Uri's class. So he never says to students, you can all be great mathematicians because you should. He instead has students go look at the National Academy of Sciences reports at the frontiers of the field and say, what are the major societal problems that calculus is helping to solve right now? And how do you envision yourself contributing to them? And there's something about your frustration and difficulty now meaning something bigger than yourself that I think goes hand in hand with the growth mindset. Now, Mary, you guys have thought a lot about the culture of independence and mindset, and I think that's a critical aspect as well.
Yeah, I would say that, one of the things we've been working a lot in schools where racial, ethnic, and minority students constitute the majority of the student body. And what we're seeing there is that really fixed mindset in some ways communicates more of these independent norms. That if some people have it and some people don't, we have to compete against each other to see who's the star in the room, right? Who's the smartest student? And it really creates this sort of competition, independent, do it yourself, don't rely on others, don't work with others, because that actually might suggest that you maybe need some assistance or need some help in developing your understanding. Whereas the growth mindset, when it's combined with the idea, again, of this community of learners, where we're all in this together, and that no matter where you start from, the goal is to actually increase your understanding of biology or chemistry or writing over the course of the semester, right? And that is actually more motivating, not only to students who come from interdependent backgrounds, like our Black, Latino, first generation, and often low income students that come from more interdependent backgrounds where community is really important. That's more motivating to have their classroom feel like a community of learners, but it actually also helps those students who have more fixed mindset beliefs as well to really see how they could benefit from learning from others. So it sort of has this positive benefit for everybody. Carol, did you have anything you wanted to add around some of these ideas?
Yes.
Great.
Every year I teach a freshman seminar, 15 brand new students. They're petrified. They think, I don't belong here. I better not open my mouth. People might think I'm stupid. It just all comes pouring out of them. I get them to talk about that. And I say, you're not here because someone thought you were a genius. Maybe you are, maybe you aren't. I don't even know what that means. You are here because you can make a contribution to society. And your job, while you're here in college, is to become the person who will make that contribution to society. You will build the skills the personal, emotional, and academic skills that will make you into the person who makes your contribution. And I have to do that over and over because they're so mired in social comparison. What if someone gets a higher grade than me? Well, does that mean you shouldn't want to learn that material to become the person who makes your contribution? So what? Yeah, we all want to do well, but that's not our job anymore. Grades, yes. Learning is our job. Growth is our job. And it kind of eventually, when it gets through, it takes the pressure off. Proving, competing. The other person is your rival. To I'm in my own, on the one hand, I'm on my own track, but on the other hand, I'm collaborating with people who have similar values and similar goals.
Yeah, and just to double click on that, for a lot of our students, they are their grades, at least that's how they feel. And it can feel risky to adopt a growth mindset, because what if I get a B plus? Will anyone care that I know more? You know, and helping our students see the contribution they're going to make allows them to have another reason why the focus on learning makes sense to them.
And it's not that the social comparison earlier on was misguided. They are in a testing culture that's intense. And they get into the schools they get into because they did better than other people. But at some point, you have to stop focusing on the immediate grades and scores and think about what you want to do with your life that's worthwhile.
Yeah. So we have this other question about emotional intelligence. And one thing this makes me think of, Mary, is the work you've done combining growth mindset with stress mindsets. And you know, one cornerstone of emotional intelligence is being able to look at a stressful situation and then remind yourself, oh, I actually can look differently at this. And if I do look differently at this, I might cope a little better. And you've done research on that with students taking the bar exam, for example. Do you want to share that?
Sure. It's one of the first interventions that have actually looked at standardized test taking as the outcome. So law students come in to, they go spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on a degree, they graduate, and then within 2 months they have to sit for the bar exam. And if you don't pass the bar exam, right, you don't become a lawyer, you don't make that money back. So it's very high stakes for them. And what we did was we created an intervention that really talked about, we saw as we were following a cohort of bar test takers to really understand their psychology in this moment of preparation between graduation and sitting for the exam. One of the things we saw was that students were really, not only, they were really stressed out about the mistakes they were making on these practice tests. Everyone takes a practice test at the beginning, everyone does really badly. And what they were doing was actually, instead of focusing on the areas that they were getting wrong, they were instead putting more attention in the areas that they were doing well, because it felt good and it felt kind of aversive to have to continue to really focus on the places where the mistakes were. So we put some messages in the intervention that really talk about using the mistakes as a way to illuminate the path forward to a better outcome on the bar exam. We also heard that students were stressing about the stress they were experiencing. Like, oh my gosh, I have to read this paragraph 3 times in order to really understand it because I'm so stressed out. And now I'm stressing about my stress, and it's like a, negative feedback cycle. And so what we talked about in the intervention was really how thinking about stress, that there's actually a certain level of stress that's important for functioning and for attention, and that what the stress at a certain level, the right level, could do for people is really sort of show them what they care about, to focus them on the things that matter most, and to use it not as a signal that you don't know what you're doing, but a signal that you care about what you're doing. right? And so those two messages combined, as well as purpose. So we also put in a purpose part of this intervention where, you know, what we found was that test takers after the 2-month period, their motivation to study would wane and they just get so tired, I can't look at those books anymore, you know, really thick study books. And so we said, you know, when your motivation wanes, remind yourself about the reason you're taking this bar exam. What is it that you want to accomplish for you, for your family, for your community? What is the impact that you're going to have? So mindsets, adaptive mindsets about mistakes, stress mindset beliefs, and then the purpose for why you're sitting there. What we found is that we were actually able to increase test performance. This was across the California bar exam for 2 years in a row with this intervention by anywhere between 9% and 25% on the bar exam. And so, you know, just really shifting our mindset around these things can really have a big impact in the moment as we're preparing for these high stakes learning situations.
Yeah. And that I'll just attest that that combination of my ability can grow and my body's stress response itself could, under some circumstances, be useful for learning. It ends up being a kind of magic combination. And we've tested the same idea here at UT, and we find that students do better in their freshman year quizzes when they get the combo of these messages. Mm-hmm. And just this fall, the latest numbers are 3,046 students in CNS have gotten a version of that combo of growth mindset and stress mindset here at UT. So I think that, Mary, the work you're talking about is going to help us go from just focusing on academic outcomes to trying to get the academic and the stress, anxiety, and so on outcomes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Address both of those pieces. Yep.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. We have a question about organizations, a few questions about organizations. So Mary, you've led a lot of work on growth mindset leadership, and there's at least one dean on this call, though maybe doesn't need to be in the treatment group. But you know, how do faculty who will take on leadership roles, you know, need to be thinking about organizational cultures that support growth mindset, and also
Right. I mean, we have seen that really how organizations structure everything from the way that they interview people for positions, the way that they onboard people, what their onboarding process is like. If you don't have an onboarding process, like in much of academia, you're just kind of suddenly appointed to this role, and how do I do this, and what kinds of messages do I really want to be sending? That's a real place for development. How do we evaluate people? How do we promote people? What are the criteria that we're using? Are we just using whether or not they're sort of engaging in sort of the check the box, they've published enough, or they've met their particular work requirements, for example, in organizations? Are we also looking about distance traveled and some of the obstacles and challenges they overcame and how they were actually able to do that, knowing that past performance predicts future performance, and you want people who are resilient to some of these challenges and creative in terms of the strategies that they use in the business context and the organizational context to really focus on that. We find that in these organizational settings, these fixed in mindset cultures that are created in whole organizations through things like their mission statements, their policies and practices around evaluation, their interactions between management and employees really has a big impact on the extent to which people are willing to collaborate across teams, the extent to which they engage in ethical or unethical behavior. So if I have to prove myself to be the star of my team in the workplace, well, then guess what I'm doing? I'm hoarding information. I'm not sharing it with others. I'm definitely not, you know, showing what I've learned or what maybe some of the things that could trip us up in the future might be. Instead, I'm sort of holding myself out to be the person who's going to save the organization, for example. So less likely to engage in these ethical practices if I think that I'm in a fixed mindset organization. And then finally, we sort of see effects on innovation and creativity, the extent to which people are willing to take risks in their work and to put together new ideas in novel ways is reduced when they're in a fixed mindset organization where risk-taking is frankly risky for their evaluation and performance. If they make a mistake, they might think that they're automatically likely to be demoted or taken off some of the forward-facing teams in these organizations, given less prestigious jobs in those organizations. So fixing growth mindset at the organizational level, at the team level, and with my supervisor, perceiving my supervisor's mindset, and then at the organizational level as a whole, really shapes a lot of these dynamics within the organization, as well as ultimately performance outcomes that we've seen in terms of the amount of funds companies put towards R&D and the extent to which they're profitable.
Yeah. Carol, I know you've thought a little bit about this as well.
Yeah, yeah. I might also mention that Microsoft reimagine the whole organization in terms of a growth mindset culture. And the CEO credits growth mindset as being a main factor in the ability of the organization to have a resurgence and take the lead in cloud technology. They also instituted a number of programs so that great ideas, talent can arise from unexpected places in the organization, not just the few people you labeled as high potential when you hired them.
Yeah. And that was a real turnaround, I think, for Microsoft. I remember when we both talked to Bill Gates about 10 years ago, and it was not necessarily on the radar, and it's really been a culture change. So I think that's an example of how culture change is possible in an exciting way.
Yes.
So go ahead.
One more thing to say is, in the research that Mary was discussing, the people who saw their company as having this growth mindset philosophy were more committed to the company, more loyal, more ready to go the extra mile. So you had a motivated workforce.
Yeah.
Collaborative as well. Okay.
So I'm going to ask for closing comments, and then we're going to hand it off to Paul. Carol, is there any final comments you want to make, especially around the challenge of changing culture and instructors in the future?
Yes, I hope people saw that we have the foundation. We know some of the practices that are clearly promoting one culture or the other, but we have a long way to go. I think the team led by David and Mary is so impressive in the ability to work with teachers, to work with other researchers. If we came back in a year or 2 years, we would be able, we hope, to give you much clearer answers.
Great. Paul?
Yes. First of all, please come back in a year or sooner. Let me say to Carol and to Mary and David, this is enormously stimulating, and we hugely appreciate you spending time with us, teaching us about what you're up to, but also fundamentally the work that you're actually doing. I mean, every time we gather to talk about education in the college and in the broader group on campus, it's inspiring and it stimulates us to think harder about what we're up to. But this is particularly special because this is really providing us with tools that are really going to change the world. So this is just fabulous. I just want to say a couple of things that really struck me. There were many, I could go on, but I'll be very brief. I was really struck by this idea that we can undo at least some of the harm done by cultural stereotypes. And this is a remarkable and important thing. I also loved the idea that we can preserve, nurture, and keep hold of curiosity for longer. Again, it's a fantastic thing. And I think this could be part of the help with the leaky pipeline issues that we face all the time in the STEM fields. you talk about Everest and base camp. I think you're much further up the mountain than that, but we're with you all the way to the summit, and we just can't wait to find out what we learn on the way up to the summit. And we will be there with you together. When I first met David, he talked about College of Natural Sciences being the CERN of education research. We are happy and honored to be that partner with you. And Carol said right early on that the next generation will rebuild the world. And I wholeheartedly agree with that, believe in that it has to be. And I think that more than anything makes this work that you are doing as important as anything we do. So thank you. Come back and see us soon. Carol, Mary, David, I'll see you very soon, I hope. And let's really just fire ahead on all cylinders, because this is really exciting. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
I actually have a question. I would love to ask it if I may. Let's suppose you have a really good experience with a growth mindset instructor who brings out the best in you, and you pivot to becoming a growth mindset student. And then you encounter a fixed mindset instructor later on. Do they do a lot of harm? Are you resilient? Do we yet know?
Oh, that's such an interesting question, and one that I'm thinking about a lot. We're really thinking about, can we create growth mindset interventions that arm people with ways of continuing to implement their growth mindset, even if they're not in an environment that fosters it. We've tried to do this in several ways. Well, one way that we've already tried to do it is to combine. We now think we are not just in one mindset or the other all the time. You can get triggered into a fixed mindset. Maybe when you enter that new teacher's classroom, or maybe when you have a big setback or you're rejected from a school of your choice. How do you get back to that growth mindset place? And in one intervention, we added mindfulness training techniques with respect to these fixed mindset triggers. It's just a thought, it's just a feeling, doesn't mean it's real. Detach from it, let it go. And that kind of boosted the effect, even when students, particularly when students inevitably confronted challenges and setbacks. I think when you're in a more fixed mindset environment, you have to ask what makes sense here? What parts of my growth mindset can I use? Maybe I don't feel comfortable making public mistakes or expressing confusion, but maybe I don't give up on my abilities. I ask a student, an older student, to tutor me, things like that.
Mm-hmm. You used the word boost, and I had found myself thinking earlier, and I'm sure you all have too, that maybe we need some kind of institutional booster sessions, so that even if people encounter faculty who don't have the right attitudes in the classroom, you have a kind of resilience to cope, and you sort of come back for a refresher.
Or maybe you create a growth mindset support group. Maybe people who want to stay in a growth mindset wear a certain button or pin and find each other, and then kind of supply the boost of the belief in learning and growth, the values that they need.
They send out the bat signal.
Yeah.
That's what we need. A giant G out there in the sky. Yeah. We have to do that.
Yeah.
Mary, thank you very much. I know you slipped away for a minute, but I just wanted to make sure you heard my gratitude. I think this is really a wonderful gathering, and as you know, we're an enormous campus, you know very well. But when we bring together, people to hear this kind of story, it's not only valuable for what they learn, but it creates a kind of bonding amongst us to then exchange those tokens in our own conversations, and it really helps us move forward together.